Hello, all. Welcome back to my fragrance journey. My name is Ron, and today we're going to be doing something a little bit different. So, with my fragrance storage, I keep my fragrances on two shelves in my closet. I have several deep shelves, and so two of them are dedicated just to my fragrances. Of course, one day I might have to expand that, but hopefully not too soon. Anyway, currently within those shelves, I have started to slowly get here and there these three-tiered shelves just to organize a little bit better and make it a little easier to reach things because, again, the shelves themselves are rather deep. And with that, when I had gotten the first tiered shelf, I got it just by itself to test, the spacing, test the build quality, all those things before I got any more. And with the first one, since it was the only one and kind of thus, for the time, made it a bit of a feature within my fragrance storage, I thought a bit about how I should use it. What should go on it? What should be displayed that extra bit more prominently amongst my other fragrances? And so I quickly stumbled on this idea, realizing that I had enough fragrances to do it, where I could create what I have been calling maximum conflict shelf. Now, that is because I had, at the time, perfumes from Elizabeth Arden, Estee Lauder, and Revlon. All three companies of which their original founders hated each other. And so the idea of sticking all of those fragrances on a shelf tickled me. Now, I realized at the time to really have maximum conflict and to really get this going, I needed to also procure a fragrance from Helena Rubinstein. I actually didn't know at the time if Helena Rubinstein had ever put out any fragrances. I have since found out that yes, they did, and I did procure a vintage bottle of one of them. And so now I truly have a maximum conflict shelf. And so thus today I want to share about that shelf. I want to go over the fragrances that I have, as well as pepper in some tidbits about their respective founders and maybe why they hated each other so. So without further ado, let's go ahead and explore the conflict. So to start, let us begin with Blazer by Helena Rubinstein. So the brand Helena Rubinstein was started by Helena Rubinstein and originally named Chaja Rubinstein, who was born in Poland in 1872. She fled Poland and more importantly, fled an arranged marriage in 1896 and moved to Australia to live with her uncle, who was a shopkeeper. Now, in the area of Australia that they lived, it was known for sheep, known for raising sheep and, wool and all of that. As a byproduct, there's well, maybe not a byproduct, but as an additional part of the wool making process and all of that, there was lots of available lanolin. And lanolin, it is a great additive to skincare. It's moisturizing and all sorts of things. And so when Helena had moved to Australia, she found that locals were kind of fascinated or interested in her beautiful skin, her flawless, gorgeous, beautiful skin. And apparently so interested that they wanted to know her beauty secrets. And so she chalked it up to this special beauty cream that her mother had created in Poland and sent her off with. And she started selling this beauty cream, which she called creme Valais. It became popular enough and successful enough that she was able to open a salon, a beauty salon, in 1902, which is essentially considered the start of the Helena Rubinstein brand. The corporation themselves list that as their beginning, 1902. And then it became very popular and grew in popularity and success to where she was able to open more salons in Australia and then able to take that with her to Europe and also to the UK. And then finally in 1915, she was able to move to the US with her husband, and they opened their first salon there. And then, subsequently became popular as she'd done in all her the other countries, and were able to open other beauty salons. All of this kind of came alongside her meeting and essentially developing a very quick and very intense and everlasting rivalry with Elizabeth Arden, who we'll talk about a bit more later on. And so, with all the success, this led her into different areas of beauty. And in 1941, supposedly, because there are some conflicting things I found, but supposedly the first fragrance, Heaven Scent, launched in 1941. And that was a fragrance with a myriad of notes. You can still find vintage bottles online and things like that. I've never smelled it, but it's got classic citrus and florals and balsamic notes and woody notes, and I am definitely interested to smell that at some point. But she launched with that, and then sometime in the 70s, again, supposedly, because this is a really conflicting history here, but she launched Blazer. Now, the conflicting part comes because there is also Blazer by Anne Klein. And I have seen so many different accounts for this. Some things say that Helena Rubinstein was first. Some say that Anne Klein was first with the fragrance. Some, and then they say that either way, whenever the other got a hold of it, that it was because they bought it out from the other one. And some reports even say that like Helena bought or created it, sold it, bought it back, all these different things. And, who knows, honestly. I'm sure somebody does. And if anybody watching does, please let me know kindly. Any corrections to this timeline for Blazer, and actually anything I talk about in this video. There's a lot of things. I'm not a historian, clearly. I'm not a researcher. So anything you find that there is of falsehood and anything that's incorrect, please kindly correct me and add the information below for all of us, because I think anybody who finds this interesting would want to know the real story. But again, kind of muddled as far as how this Blazer came to be. But at some point in the 70s, apparently, Helena Rubinstein did have Blazer. And that's what I have here. This is a vintage bottle. I don't know if it's from the 70s or from the 80s, because again, timelines and I don't know. I haven't deeply tried to look into production and all that. This doesn't have a batch code on it that I can easily find or anything, so I really haven't any clue. But what I can say is, as far as this fragrance goes, it is very much of the 70s. It's very much of that timeline. It's got, again, very classic sort of combination of things. We've got plum, hyacinth, bergamot, and lemon in the top. The middle is carnation, rose, orris, and jasmine. And the base is oak moss, cedar, musk, and sandalwood. Now, for me, I get really just mostly a floral fragrance out of this. I get a floral fragrance that kind of goes more woody in the dry down, but it's pretty equal, honestly, kind of in the mid. So it's kind of like we start out floral, get to the mid, a little bit of both more, and then the end is a touch more woody. But very floral, very carnation, also the rose for sure. Those are the two strongest florals to me. And then a lot of the moss, and then, like I said, those kind of woody tones. It says cedar and sandalwood. I don't know that I pick out any of those particularly specific. It doesn't smell overly cedar or overly sandalwood, but definitely just a woody quality. And again, like a lot of fragrances of this time, and something I say all the time, a lot of these fragrances, the way that they were formulated and blended and whatnot, you don't see the edges. You don't see where a lot of things start and stop. So it all kind of just blends into this amalgamous concoction, and fantastic. It smells lovely and gorgeous. I have also smelled the Anne Klein version, thanks to the very lovely Danielle at Perfume Journal, as always, will be listed below. She, at one point, amongst many other goodies, because she's just so sweet and sends me things, which is ridiculous, because I'm a terrible human and never send anything back. And I know she says I don't have to, but I want to, and I'm always telling myself, oh, I'll get my shit together and do it, and I don't. One day more. I've got most of the things. I've got the decant system and all that. I just need to do it. But anyway, I digress. So I do have Anne Klein's version. I think that they smell very similar. There are some different notes listed, some different aromatics, but really, overall, they're pretty similar. The biggest differences I can find, Anne Klein's overall is just a little bit smoother, a little more gentle in certain ways. Not that I would say the Helena Rubinstein is harsh, but by comparison, it definitely is a little bit just bolder and stronger in some ways. I don't know that I prefer either one. I think they're both good, and I think they're both kind of interchangeable. But yes, definitely the Anne Klein's a little smoother, and also the Helena Rubinstein to me has a noticeable cigarette ash touch as well. Not super strong, but it's something I can pick out if I really kind of smell it and think about it. Whereas the Anne Klein has none of that. So it's very similar otherwise, and I think if you have one, you don't have to have the other. But definitely a fun little, honestly, quandary in the perfume world. Which came first, the Anne Klein or the Helena Rubinstein? It's a question for the ages. But yeah, so that's one that I got. That was the one that I added to Maximum Conflict Shelf, actually, as the last of the conflict perfumes. I didn't buy any of these just because of this. Again, this was something I kind of found after I had most of these. The Helena Rubinstein was definitely the only one that was very intentional to add because of that, but also because I just wanted to smell something from Helena Rubinstein, and also because I was curious about it with Blazer from Anne Klein. So yeah, this is one I really do like, I really enjoy, and that is Helena Rubinstein. Let us move on to our next rival. So with our next rival, we have Elizabeth Arden. Now, the fragrance I'll be talking about is green tea, and the flanker I have, green tea exotic. But before we get into that, we'll get into Elizabeth Arden, the company, and ultimately the founder, also named Elizabeth Arden, though initially she was born as Florence Nightingale Graham in 1881 in Canada. And she kind of started out outside of the world of beauty, like Helena Rubinstein. She actually started out training to be a nurse, and she, in doing so and working as a nurse, got interested apparently in like the various salves and burn creams and things like that, and apparently thought that they could, maybe be used, or similar things could be used for skincare. And then through her life and things like that, she eventually left Canada and had immigrated to the US, and she took on a job at one point as a bookkeeper for a pharmaceutical company. And in addition to that, apparently was able to kind of tag along and learn from the chemists in the labs and learn about ultimately, the things that would lead her to be able to make her own skincare and all of that. And so then in 1909, she partnered with Elizabeth Hubbard, and they had started to open up salons and things like that, offering beauty treatments, facials, that sort of thing. And then they ended up separating in 1910. And she apparently didn't want to have to, afford changing the signage too much and things like that, and wanted to kind of keep a, I guess, marketable name. So she kept the Elizabeth that was already on their signage, but she changed the last name and added Arden instead, which apparently came from a local farm in the area. A lot of these things, again, not too clear, but yeah, it became Elizabeth Arden, the first Red Door salon. And again, 1910 is when this happened, which is considered the official launch of the company. And similar to Helena Rubinstein, she was able to open up multiple salons, grow her business. And she is kind of credited with being one of the factors that helped cosmetics and makeup specifically become more socially acceptable. Now, there are some interesting claims I've seen throughout the years. The claim that she apparently was a rampant suffragette and helped the suffrage movement and provided thousands of tubes of red lipstick to suffragettes in 1912 during a march. That's interesting, the story. I've looked into that, and I actually found a really interesting article, which I'll make sure to link, from Museum of Makeup, and doesn't seem to maybe be the case. That doesn't quite make sense for the time. It doesn't make sense for the product line they had, and doesn't make sense for just the kind of social acceptability of makeup at that time. It wasn't that far along. So that's an interesting kind of side anecdote thing. But anyway, as she grew and expanded the business and eventually added more cosmetics and things, just like with Helena Rubinstein, eventually came fragrance. She launched her first fragrance in 1936 called Bluegrass. That is a fragrance that is still available today. You can find it all over various retailers, secondhand shops, both new and vintage formulations. Very easy to find Bluegrass. I've never actually smelled it, all that said. It's one of, or as I always like to say, knowingly smelled it. I'm sure throughout the years I've smelled Bluegrass, but I've never actually known it when I have. And I've wanted to, I just haven't gotten around to it. There's kind of certain fragrances you see very often like that, or Estee Lauder's Pleasures, things like that. These fragrances that I just always see available for sale somewhere. And I don't know if it's because I just see them everywhere that I don't know, I don't have any interest because it's just almost like overdone. But yeah, I've just never gotten around to it. But I am curious to smell it. And it was, very much of its time in the 30s. There's aldehydes, florals, aromatics, and spices and woods and things. Lots of notes. I have, though, as I mentioned, Green Tea by Elizabeth Arden. And also, not too long ago, I got a flanker, my first flanker for green tea, which has many of them, which is Green Tea Exotic, and I will touch on both a little bit. Now, green tea itself launched in 1999. The nose behind it is Francis Kurkdjian of the ever famous Baccarat Rouge 540 and all of the Kurkdjian fragrances. But in 1999, he created this with Elizabeth Arden, and it is a fragrance that has lemon, bergamot, mint, orange peel, and rhubarb. Then there is jasmine, musk, oak moss, fennel, carnation, and white amber. And finally, green tea, jasmine, musk, oak moss, celery seeds, caraway, and cloves. Now, for all those many notes, I've always found this fragrance to open up with just lemon, very lemon forward. And I do get the green tea, but it's after the lemon. The lemon comes first, comes in strong, and then a little bit after the green tea starts coming in, everything else really starts to come in. And this is another one where it's very hard to decipher too much in particular. So beyond the lemon, beyond the green tea, I really don't get much else, or at least anything too distinct. What I do get, though, is what I've always said, is this just feels like a spa in a bottle. This feels like a spa or a chic hotel lobby. It's just that kind of classy, soft, very of the late 90s, early 2000s, very fresh, very refreshing to wear, absolutely gorgeous and perfect in the summer, great anytime throughout the year. It is a very light fragrance. It is not a long-lasting fragrance. Many people bemoan the fact that it's really more like a glorified body spray, and I would say that it is too. And I can understand that's frustrating, especially if you're paying full price, though I will say you don't need to pay full price. You can find green tea always on FragranceNet, always on Mercari, eBay, wherever. There's always a secondhand or discount or reseller, and you can usually find a full-size bottle for under $40. And that's still more than most body sprays, so it might still not seem worth it. But if you love the scent as much as I do, it's well worth it. And I recently added Green Tea Exotic. Now with that fragrance, it launched in 2009. The nose behind that one is Rodrigo Flores-Roux, who's very famous perfumer, has done many things for Tom Ford, Clinique, tons of flankers actually for green tea. And this one features black tea, lime, and bergamot in the top, then green tea, lily, orchid, and jasmine, and then the base is narcissus, woodsy notes, and amber. This one, like I hear about a lot of these flankers, and this is the first flanker I've ever had for green tea, but like I hear about a lot of them, they all do smell much like the original. So they are very much a flanker in the more traditional sense, where you've got kind of the base fragrance that everybody knows, that base DNA, and then there are minor or major tweaks from there on out. In this case, I'd say minor tweaks, but enough that I wouldn't say they are like super, super close either. It's kind of one of those, they're siblings, cousins. You can definitely see the resemblance, but there's enough change that, you're not going to mistake them as twins. So in this case, I'm not sure which note it is. Maybe it's one of the florals, maybe, I don't know, something. But there's something in this that it's not salty, but it's verging on salty. I don't know what it is. It kind of reminds me of what I get from Charlie White by Revlon, which I do find decidedly salty. This is almost, but there's something in the floral. Maybe it's the orchid note. I don't know. I don't know why it would be salty to be to that point even, but there's something there that's almost salty. So kind of the base green tea DNA, although the citrus is different. It's not lemon. It is more lime, and it is honestly almost more pungent to start. And then you get the tea notes. Could also be the black tea that's making things a little different in addition to the green tea. But yeah, this is an interesting one. I've kind of hemmed and hawed about which flanker would be my first. There's been so many that I've wanted. I still want the Coconut Breeze one. But at the same time, I've seen so many that people are like, listen, you really don't need to get this one. Just keep the original. So I've really hemmed and hawed. But Karina from my perfume map, she talked about this one not too long ago, and it just seemed intriguing, and it was one I hadn't heard about much. So I did find it on, I think, eBay. This one isn't in production anymore as far as I can tell, so you'll have to go to a secondhand site. It wasn't very expensive. Again, I think I bought it under $30. And yeah, I really like this one. But that is Green Tea and Green Tea Exotic from Elizabeth Arden. And again, as far as the rivalry, like I mentioned with Helena Rubinstein, they kind of were really kind of tackling the US market around the same time, and early on, sized one another up and realized that they were competition for each other, and it just kind of grew. They kind of, moved in a lot of similar ways, both having their salons, both having their salons worldwide, both kind of starting with a focus in skincare and then expanding out into other types of cosmetics and fragrance and things. So really, like, point by point, very similar people, both immigrated to the US. I mean, it's just a lot of overlap. And so also overlapping with the same customers and the same people you're targeting. And so it was really kind of, I think, just all drummed up from that and just competition through their businesses. And it became a very heated, very popular rivalry, so much so that there have been books published about it. The book War Paint even became a musical, with Christine Ebersole as Helena Rubinstein, or as Elizabeth Arden, and then the Patti LuPone as Helena Rubinstein. I've never seen the musical. I've always wanted to. And so, yeah, it just became this huge beauty empire clash that lasted until they died. And they actually died within, I think, like 18 months of each other. Very interesting. But they also had some other rivals. So let's go ahead and get on into the first of those. So our next rival is Charles Revson. Born Charles Haskell Revson in 1906 in Massachusetts, he got his kind of entry into Revlon by way of another cosmetics company called Elka that he worked for up until he was basically skipped over for a promotion that he'd wanted to become a national distributor for the company. In his upset from not having been promoted, he left Elka and decided to go into business for himself, now having, kind of attained a knowledge and things like that and connections and all of that. So he partnered up with his brother, Joseph Revson, and a chemist, Charles Lackman. And the three of them founded Revlon. And so the Revlon comes from both brothers, the Revson brothers, and then for Charles Lackman, the L in his last name is what replaced the S in Revson. So you put that L in the middle instead of the S and you get Revlon. And so, with that, their first and only product was their cream enamel polish that they had. And it was offered in various pigments, various shades, kind of representing more of like the fashion colors of the day and things like that, which other nail varnish brands hadn't really done that much up until that point. So he kind of started to corner the market there. And then Charles Revson himself was always touted as a great and brilliant business mind, as were, all of these people that I'm mentioning, all amazing business people, all amazing marketing people. And so his kind of knack was for, fantastic names for his products, cherries in the snow, fire and ice, and then also targeting like magazines and getting into print ads and things like that, and also just getting his product into salons. Obviously, a lot of our people that I'm mentioning are salon based, and so he also made sure that his nail polishes were available in the salons. And so with the company, eventually the other founders, I think by the 60s, both Joseph Revson and Charles Lackman had left the business, and it was just Charles Revson running it himself. And then, as far as them getting into fragrance, throughout the years, they had tried many different things, many different products in beauty. They'd even acquired some companies that had pharmaceuticals. I saw something about at one point, a company they acquired was working on like diabetes medication, different things. So they really had their hands in many different pots. But in the areas of beauty, that was really where it was prime. And they started with a fragrance, at least the one I could find that was the first, which is called Aquamarine. Now, if you look up things, you will see Jean Naté is listed as their first fragrance from 1935. That is a fragrance that actually was started by a different company, Charles of the Ritz, and it was bought by Alexandra de Murkoff and other companies throughout the years until it eventually landed with Revlon. And Revlon basically got rid of Charles of the Ritz and all that was associated with it and just called it a Revlon fragrance from there on out. So you will, of course, again, see things that say that Jean Naté is their first fragrance from the 30s, but that was actually something they acquired. But like I said, from what I have seen, it's actually Aquamarine, and that launched in 1946. And that is a fragrance that was described as a floral aldehydic fragrance with white floral, spices, aldehydes, tobacco, and many other of the typical players of that time frame. It's not one that I've ever smelled, and I honestly hadn't learned of it until I started researching for this video, but in reading about it, I'm curious. There's something about those fragrances that kind of have seemed to fall by the wayside, because again, Jean Naté is still something you can get, and that's something that everybody attributes to Revlon, even though it technically wasn't. And then other various fragrances from them are still around, including what I'm going to talk about in just a moment. But something like Aquamarine that kind of had this history, kind of was a main offering of theirs for a time, and then now just seems to have fallen into obscurity. Very interesting. So, on to, though, what I've actually smelled, what I actually own, which is Charlie Blue. Now, this was a fragrance that launched in 1973. It's the first flanker to Charlie, which also seems to have launched the same year. Now, there's talk about whether or not they're really that different of a fragrance, if at all. I've seen some people say, yeah, they're a little different. I've seen some people say they're basically the same thing. And yet I've seen others say that they're very different. Obviously, like all fragrances, I think that's going to be up to personal interpretation. I have never smelled the original Charlie, so I just can't say. But Charlie Blue, which is the one that's more widely available, it seems like you can't really get the original unless you go to like a reseller. But anyway, Charlie Blue, like I said, 1973. All the Charlie fragrances initially were kind of marketed to a younger demographic. It was kind of, a Charlie girl was the thing, and they had commercials and things like that with, I think it was initially the model was Shelley Hack, and then it was Lauren Hutton at some point. I could be lying. Or Lauren Hutton was Ultima 2. That was another thing that they launched later on with cosmetics. There's a lot of information. Listen, I can't keep it all straight. But anyway, it was marketed to a younger audience. It was very popular. I have seen Charlie throughout the years, dressing tables, various, drugstores and things like that. I'd never smelled it. And somehow, some way, I don't know what happened. I stumbled upon it some years ago. I'd stumbled on it and decided I really wanted it at some point, and I just never got around to it. And then my mother eventually bought me a bottle as a gift, and oh, how I love this fragrance. So this has notes of oak moss, geranium, musk, sandalwood, rose, and jasmine. Very oak moss, very geranium, bit of rose. It's, you know what? Let me spray a little on the back of my hand here. I haven't worn it in a few months. Oh my gosh, it's just so good. It's truly one of my favorites in my collection. Definitely my favorite of the Charlies. I do have some other flankers. I'm not going to mention them really, only because even though I mentioned the other green tea, this will just be an even longer video if I mention every single flanker I've got for these things. But yeah, Charlie Blue. It's strong, but in a soft way. So it's definitely a fragrance that you don't have to put a lot of sprays on, and you can really get the impact. But at the same time, it's not punch you in the face, even though it's strong. So, you could maybe overspray it, but if you I usually do like 3-4 sprays to start, and it just, oh, so gorgeous. It's kind of, again, that like geranium, carnation, all those to me are kind of like almost like a spicy floral. There's something almost a little bitter maybe, almost a little sharp in them, but not quite in this. It's not something I truly describe as sharp. The oak moss just adds this earthiness to everything and greenness, and it's, oh my gosh, it's so good. And everything about this is just, again, like so many things, you can't really pick out too much distinctly. But to me, this is one that it's interesting because I think today, this wouldn't be described as a youthful fragrance. This wouldn't be described as something that is for, the youth of today. But I can kind of see when I smell it how it would be different maybe than an older fragrance, like I'm thinking Estee Lauder's Youth Dew, even something maybe like Halston, other older fragrances I have, or well, Halston's around the same time, but marketed, I think that was much more marketed to adults. But this, yeah, I can see where this is used, but again, like more like teenager, more like young adult, 20-year-old. That's what I can see with this fragrance, not quite like a child's fragrance. And oh my gosh, it's just so, I'm loving myself sick here. I'm just enjoying smelling this. I'm sorry. It's hard for me to form thoughts because I'm just enjoying the good scent. But I think it's in the context of these days. It's something that I would say is classic, but it's, while not mature, I wouldn't say old lady. I know someone's thinking that. I wouldn't say that. But this does have actually, in contrast to its original purpose being for the youth, this has like an adult quality to it. This is a bit more grown up, not so playful, but it's definitely pretty. It's definitely something that I would feel good about wearing maybe to like work or something like that. But it also is just great for a day out. Good in the sun, good in winter, good anytime. Yeah, I really, of all of the Charlies, I love Charlie Blue the most. I definitely want to try more. There's many, many flankers, and I want to try the original Charlie. But this is a great one. And as far as Charles Revson and his rivalries and things, now, from what I've seen, basically, as far as Helena and Elizabeth Arden were concerned, he wasn't seen as much as their direct rival all the time. They were much more in conflict with each other, but being another person in that same beauty space, in that same space with cosmetics and even skincare and sort of thing, he still was a rival as well, and definitely a big brand to contend with. But I think that they kind of saw him as a little bit of a, like together. It was one of those, they could hate each other, but they both equally hated him together kind of thing. And I think they both saw him as kind of a nuisance and kind of tacky maybe. These were, ladies who had immigrated in. They maybe felt a bit more worldly. I don't know. I think I kind of get that vibe from what I've read. And they saw him as just this upstart American salesman who really was invading their space and just, yeah, a nuisance. And I think he was seen as kind of like the new money, like he wasn't really on their same level. And I think that he knew that that's how they felt, because things I've seen and things you've said, it kind of gives the impression that he was kind of bitter that nobody else took him as seriously as all of them, even though he was a major contender in this beauty space. So yeah, that is Charles Revson. That's Charlie Blue. And now on to good old Charlie's biggest rival. And now our final rival comes to play. Born in 1908 in New York City, we have Josephine Esther Menser, later known as Estee Lauder. She went on to found the Estee Lauder Company, which is not only a cosmetics company, but has become the second largest cosmetics company in, well, conglomerate really, in the world, right after L'Oreal. Pretty much if you see something on a shelf, if it isn't owned by L'Oreal in the end of it, it's going to be Estee Lauder 9 times out of 10. Now, this all started as a lot of the others, where we have someone who is doing as they all did, working to make ends meet, working to maybe have more than they had growing up. Estee Lauder, like them all, started out a bit on the poor side of things, had a lot of siblings, and went to work in her father's hardware store. Eventually, she, learned some business things, but wanted to expand, and so eventually when she was older went to work with her uncle, who was a chemist, and sold various things, including creams, lotions, fragrances, and all of that. So she helped to, or she began to learn not only how they were formulated and all of that, and helped to have input, but also she really started taking over the sales part of everything, taking these products around, going to different salons, going to different places, demonstrating how they were working. And eventually, with the help of her later husband, Joseph Lauder, turned this into Estee Lauder, which was founded in 1946. Now, they grew and they grew fast. So after starting out, getting her products into salons and things like that, like the others had done, she also really pushed to get her products into department stores. By 1948, they had their first department store account with Saks Fifth Avenue. And at that point, it was really known for their, their cosmetics, their cream packs, and other, cream lotions and things like that, rouge, that sort of thing that they were selling. But by 1953, Estee Lauder ventured into the world of fragrance with their first fragrance, Youth Dew. I became enamored with the idea of Youth Dew after reading about it in a book, a fantastic book. If you like makeup and beauty history and the kind of the products that have really been icons and legends within this industry, you might really like Pretty Iconic by Sali Hughes, who is a wonderful journalist and does a lot in the world of beauty journalism and things like that and content creation. And she wrote about this fragrance because it is pretty iconic. So I've done a dedicated video to this fragrance. I won't go too much into it, but basically took, especially in the US, fragrance from being something that the man in your life bought for you if you were a woman. She took it from being that and helped change it into something that women bought for themselves. And what it started as is marketing it and selling it as a bath oil. So even though it was essentially a full fragrance, or fully fledged fragrance oil, very strong, just as strong as a perfume would normally be, but since it was marketed as a bath oil, something that ladies could slip into their bath and bathe with, and, maybe wanted to apply a little bit more after they got out of the tub. Given that little loophole, it was something then that women could buy for themselves and decide that they, wanted to help themselves smell good and confident and whatever else. And so it eventually became just a regular perfume as well. And again, that was kind of a catalyst to helping women be able to buy their own fragrances as they saw fit for themselves without needing a man to initiate that. So there's, again, a whole story with that. Again, definitely check out my original video if you're curious about that. But with Youth Dew, now this is a fragrance I've had for many years now. I bought it in the bath oil, which you can still buy today in addition to the perfume spray. I wanted just kind of the most OG. Now, I don't have a vintage bottle. I bought mine, I think, in 2017. but it's still the more classic format, all that said. And this fragrance was created by Josephine Catapano, who didn't do too many other fragrances. She did do some for Ralph Lauren. She also did the Norel fragrance, which is technically a Revlon collaboration imprint, so that's interesting. But with Youth Do itself, this is a very intense, a lot going on fragrance. There is a ton of notes. We've got spices, aldehydes, narcissus, lavender, Coca-Cola, orange, peach, and bergamot at the top. The middle has more spices, cloves, cinnamon, rose, jasmine, ylang ylang, lily of the valley, cassia, and orchid. And finally in the base we have incense, tolu balsam, oak moss, peru balsam, patchouli, amber, vetiver, vanilla, and musk. Like, this is the kitchen sink to end them all. I, though, adore it. So, again, as I've said many times, you're not going to pick out every single one of these things. And honestly, I think it would be rather dreadful if it was. I'm very thankful to all these fragrances that have 1,000,001 notes and facets and accords, that we don't see all the moving parts, because I think it wouldn't actually land. Because this is so beautiful in the way it comes together, it's spiced, yes, but I think the spices aren't really the first thing. Overwhelmingly, I get a very floral aldehydic fragrance with lots of warm ambery tones, some of that incense, definitely some of the oak moss. The Coca-Cola note, everybody like seems to point that out like it's a really prominent thing, and I guess it is for other people. I can, if I close my eyes and I really think about Coca-Cola as a fragrance, yes, I can understand how we get there. Do I, or had I ever previously smelled that before I knew that that's what people found and that's what supposedly as an accord in this fragrance? No, I never would have picked out anything that was cola. But again, I can get it if I kind of think about it and have that prompting. Otherwise, it's just, again, lots of florals. You get touches of rose, touches of the lily of the valley, the jasmine, the patchouli, vanilla, musk. Like, I get all of it a little sort of, again, if I kind of think about it, but for the most part, it's just something that's incredibly warm, incredibly beautiful, very... I think this is like a very confident fragrance in its maturity. Whenever I put this on, I feel like I can just get stuff done, that I can take on situations. If I was in a board meeting or something, this would be the fragrance I'm putting on. But at the same time, it's not too stiff. It's not too rigid. There again is a beauty to this fragrance. It's very pretty. There's even a touch of a sexiness, but overwhelmingly, I just associate this, as I've said before, as like, this is what I imagine the Estee Lauder customer, or was always meant to smell like in Estee Lauder's mind. Like, when she thought about, what is my customer? Who are they? That's Youth Do in a bottle. That's exactly what an Estee Lauder customer is. Someone maybe a bit more mature, someone maybe a bit moneyed, and somebody who is very classic, a bit no nonsense, but at the same time leaning maybe a bit more traditionally feminine in some ways, a bit more chic, and yeah, just really lovely. Now, as far as her rivalry, she primarily squared off with Charles Revson. They kind of came up more around the same time, because we have to think with Helena Rubinstein and Elizabeth Arden, again, they were kind of more pitted against each other, and they again came up more in the same time. Same thing with Charles Revson and Estee Lauder. They were more around the same time. So the two pairs there really kind of squared off with each other more. And like I said, they didn't necessarily get along with the others either, and they saw everybody as competition. But Estee and Charles really hated each other, probably with the same intensity and passion that Elizabeth and Helena felt about each other. And again, like I said, I think Charles was still seen as kind of like odd man out. He was kind of placed a little bit outside of it, because things that I've read, it seems that Helena and Elizabeth, maybe while they, again, were in competition and didn't appreciate the extra work that was put in by Estee Lauder, giving them a run for their money, they still saw her as maybe sitting at a similar table to them. Whereas Charles Revson, he was just, in the words of Elizabeth Arden, she famously referred to him as that man. So whenever she was talking about him, it would just be that man. And actually, Charles Revson, spurred on by this, he launched his first fragrance for men, and it was called That Man. So they all really hated each other, and it just was to varying levels and in varying ways. So those are our rivals. So again, to sum up the maximum conflict shelf as it currently stands, I have from Helena Rubinstein, Blazer. From Elizabeth Arden, I have Green Tea Exotic, and Untold Absolute. From Revlon, I have Charlie Blue, Charlie White, and Charlie Red. And from Estee Lauder, I have Youth Dew, and also their sister company, Aromatics Elixir by Clinique. And then to round out the shelf, because I had one extra space, I do currently have Halston by Halston. At one point, the spot was occupied by Ralph Lauren. Until I get something from one of the other four companies, I just need something else again to fill the space. And it's from the 70s and it's an icon, so I felt like it was probably welcome. Well, maybe not welcome knowing those four, but definitely something that could still fit in with the timeline. And yeah, I'm sure things will come and go and change on that shelf, but as long as I can, I'm going to try to keep that space in my collection dedicated to fragrances from those four rivals because they really did create some amazing fragrances. Like I said, I'm really not trying to get things just to kind of keep up this maximum conflict thing. It's funny to me, it's interesting to me, and it's playful in a way that I think fragrance can be and sometimes isn't thought about. I think fragrances, that's the cool thing, is we can be very serious, we can be very artistic and gorgeous and very intentional, and also sometimes there can just be a little bit of fun and whimsy and maybe drama and conflict. So yeah, that's the shelf. If you have tried any of these fragrances that I featured today, definitely let me know. If there are other ones from these brands that you've tried and think I would like or others would like, please share those with us. And also, like I said, if you have any clarifying information, anything that you want to share additionally, again, kindly, don't come for me. Like I said, I'm not a historian or a researcher, but definitely just share that below as well. I find all this so very interesting, and beyond even just the world of fragrance. I'm somebody who's for a long time been interested in makeup and makeup history and all of that, so that's where a lot of these people come into play as well. And so yeah, anything that you can add would be very interesting. Like I said, I'm going to try to have the info box just chock full of information, including various articles that I used, various books that I've either read or were referenced often in the articles, and yeah, anything that I think might be interesting for further reading. So definitely hit us up in the comments below. I'd love to keep the conversation going. And of course, all the YouTube things. If you've made it this far, my goodness, it's a long one, but if you've made it this far, I would love for you to maybe subscribe so you can continue watching the videos I come out with, and, a like, thumbs up, the whole thing. And yeah, I just thank you all for joining me here on my fragrance journey. I hope you all have a wonderful rest of your day. Take care, and I'll see you on the next one. Bye.